Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Mathyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Om. How do we relate to this reality from the standpoint of individuals? Now, in this 24 model, we said that Mahat and Prakriti, that means they're both upadhis of Brahman. And this upadhi is what we call Ishwara from when we look at this universe from the standpoint of manifest. So what is now Ishwara? Ishwara is that intelligence. What intelligence? That intelligence which I showed you in that Mithya within Mithya chart, whichever form you saw, that form has a material, no doubt. But then you ask, what puts those materials together in the way that they're put together? What sustains those materials together in the way that they're sustained? For how long are those materials sustained by? And when is it time for those materials to change into something else so they could give way for another creation to take place, for another form to take place? For example, right now, what determines how long your white blood cells are going to last? What determines what those white blood cells are going to do once there is an illness in the body? What determines that intelligence, that how they're going to fight off the illnesses? That is what I'm talking about when we say intelligence. In fact, you don't have to go much farther than just the splitting of the cell when there's a birth of a fetus. It's almost as if they're guided by their own intelligence. And when they unite, they form one cell. And that one cell divides into two cells. And those two cells divide into four cells. So this is the intelligence that I'm talking about. They're not consulting. They're not like phoning someone saying, how do we divide? It's just inbuilt. And now, never mind what those cells are made of. We already understand they're made of atoms, subatomic particles, etc. But I'm showing you how there is an intelligence in and through all forms of creation. That intelligence is what you call Ishwara. What is Ishwara? As I said last week, it is Prakriti, but also that Mahat, that is upadhis of Brahman. And this upadhi is what we refer to as Ishwara. So the question that I'm posing now is, how do we relate to this Ishwara? So we first understand, step one, that this Ishwara is all knowledge, all power. Why is it all knowledge, all power? Because it is the power that sustains, manifests, and dissolves this universe. But it's also all knowledge. How is it all knowledge? Because nothing is excluded from this power. That means everything belongs within the scope of this all knowledge, all power. Your body is just one single form, operated by all knowledge, all power. My body is one form, operated by all knowledge, all power. A dog's form, an insect, an ant, it doesn't matter. It is all operated by an aspect of all knowledge, all power. And the second is, after knowing that, you have to recognize that this very all knowledge, all power is what's keeping you alive right now. Because the original question I posed was, how do you relate to it? See, if I just talk about it, then you're like, okay, so it's over there, wow. But you need to bring it down through your own body, through your own thoughts. So this all knowledge, all power is right now making you listen, making it possible for you to understand this English language, to interpret these words, and therefore to assimilate this teaching and then say, wow, I'm starting to look at the world differently. So the brain is working. The ears are working, the mind's working, everything's working right now, coordinated by this intelligence. So this very upadhi, this intelligence, is helping you every moment of life to make the choices, to make decisions, to move forward in life and have a successful life, which you then say, I'm so grateful to be alive. Why are you saying that? Because you're being held and you're being sustained and you're being kept alive by this very intelligence that is in and through holding all forms together, as we've just explained last week. So how do you relate to Ishwara? Any moment, any time, by simply recognizing what is keeping me alive right now. What is sustaining this world that I'm perceiving and interfacing with right now? That all knowledge, all power in the form of my child, in the form of my parent, in the form of students, in the form of the material that is your laptop's made out of, that your phone's made out of, which you're also using to communicate with the world, right? So in other words, all of these materials are coming from where? From Earth. What is that coming from? It is coming from the 5 elements. And we discussed last week in that chart, the 5 elements then resolve all the way into what? The final cause from the standpoint of kshetram, which is Prakriti and Mahat, in other words, the Upadhi. And that further resolves into Kshetrajna, that means Brahman. So everything you do, everything you think about, you as an individual, Jiva, and I, are totally dependent upon this all knowledge, all power. So how do you devote then? The question is, when are you not devoting? That's the real question. In other words, by understanding that I can never get away from what is keeping me alive, what is sustaining this world, then the question is not how do I devote, but rather what can I devote to? What is it that reminds me of this very intelligence? What is it that I can relate to personally that is meaningful for you, that induces that sense of devotion? At the same time, knowing no matter what you devote to, you're only ever devoting to that one all knowledge, all power, which is making that form, which is meaningful for you, what it is. And it's also making it impossible for you to have a relation to that form, have an emotion with that form. Emotion is also, remember, a law and order, which is ultimately resolved into all knowledge, all power. So any emotion you ever feel, any thought you ever have, it is nothing but a variation of all knowledge, all power. Therefore, you and I are totally, utterly dependent every second on this intelligence for us to be successful. And therefore, life becomes reverential. Life becomes devotion worthy once understanding this. And this is why the Vedic tradition, by the way, it goes even one step further. It says, you don't have to think about these laws and orders. Right? You don't have to think about how the universe works. We will give you a devata. We will give you a deity. We will, for example, give you Ganesha. And what is Ganesha? It is one aspect of all knowledge, all power, which is symbolic of that power, which makes it possible to navigate through challenges. In other words, Ganesha represents a discerning intellect, because what is it that moves you through challenges? A clever intellect, a sharp mind. Therefore, by devoting to Ganesha, instead of saying, I'm devoting, Lord, let me have a sharp mind, let me have a clear intellect. If you are relating to Ganesha, then that is your symbol. This means that by relating to Ganesha, I am relating to what? All knowledge, all power, symbolic of what Ganesha is associated to. And what is Ganesha associated to? A discerning intellect. And if you look at it goes one step further. If you look at Ganesha, right, so much symbolism on him. So on one hand, he's holding a lotus flower. He's got 4 hands, right? On the top left hand, he's holding a lotus flower. That represents his condition of liberation. That means moksha. I'm holding a lotus flower, not holding just any flower, a lotus flower, 1,000-petaled one. That means I'm liberated. On his bottom left hand, he's holding a modak, which is an Indian sweet dumpling, and that represents the fruits of this self-knowledge. That means the ananda, the fullness which the person is privileged to once understanding that there's nothing missing. 1 foot on the ground, 1 foot parallel on his seat. In other words, I'm always in touch with reality, this world, right here, right now. But at the same time, my 1 foot is horizontal. In other words, I am aligned to my true nature, kshetrajna. And then there is a mouse. A mouse, what does a mouse do? Always nibbling, never satisfied, more. In other words, and what is the mouse? Down. In other words, I have mastered my desires. It doesn't mean I've eliminated my desires. There's still a mouse. It doesn't mean the mouse is not there. In other words, I am friends with this desire. In other words, the desire does not get to me, but rather I am the master of my desires as they arise in the moment. And then we go, big head. What does a big head mean? My spiritual wisdom is huge. In other words, I got a lot of spiritual wisdom. What do big ears mean? Just an elephant, huh? No. What do big ears mean? This one's easy. My ears, they're always open to spiritual knowledge, always available. Remember, Ganesha is an enlightened being, right? And jnani, in other words, his ears are still listening to the outside world, still receiving more information, willing to learn. He's holding an axe in his right hand top. What does the axe mean? I'm able to annihilate those desires, those obstacles which arise in the moment as they arise, because I know how to handle them, implying that I've done my work. In other words, I have a proper relation with them. Therefore, I'm able to slice them and dice them in a proper way so they don't get to me. When someone triggers me, I'm able to address that right then and there. And then we've got, what else do we have? Big stomach. Big stomach implies I am full. In other words, my nature is full, and because I'm full, I'm able to address obstacles in a joyous, cheerful manner, just like Krishna, right? Krishna, goes to the palace to, give 5 options to Duryodhana, and then Duryodhana rejects every one of them. But how does Krishna remain? Still composed. He doesn't lose his composure. In other words, because Krishna knows who he is, and from that place, from that confidence, he's able to address real life circumstances. In other words, Krishna has his one foot in the world, but also one foot parallel, in other words, aligned to his true nature. And then we have big head. I think that's all there is with the Ganesha.
Trunk, I guess you covered the most.
Good. So, okay, good. Thank you for that. Now the trunk is pointed towards one direction, meaning what? My intellect is able to assess distinctly what needs to be done. In other words, I'm able to assess what is right and what is wrong, what is truthful and what is falsehood, without a second task, which is non-dual wisdom. In other words, big head represents knowledge of what? My non-dual nature. And this is the symbolic representation of Ganesha. So this means when you put Ganesha in front of your place or your little altar, it's not just a matter of devoting to a Ganesha person, you're devoting to a symbol which is symbolic of this all knowledge, all power, which its symbolism reminds you of all of the attributes of a Jivan Mukta. Therefore, you get instant inspiration. Okay, so this means if you're attracted to Ganesha, you're probably attracted to looking for a discerning intellect, because Ganesha is associated to the remover, to the navigator of obstacles in life. And then we've got Saraswati. So if you're attracted to knowledge, then you're probably going to be, attracted to Saraswati. We've got Durga. Durga is also given to us by the Vedic culture. Why? Because if you're willing to, or you want that discipline, you're looking for that power to exercise that discipline, then you go and ask, or you pray to Durga, asking all knowledge, all power, please give me that more discipline so I can actually exercise it instead of just talking about how I can do things. In other words, there's one thing to know that you have free will or the power of choice, but it's something totally different to actually willingly and joyfully exercise it with a discerning intellect. So maybe you can put all 3, because you need Ganesha for discerning intellect, but you also need Durga to exercise your willpower in the light of your discerning intellect. And then you need Saraswati, the knowledge, to hold that knowledge and to use it when is most appropriate. Because it's one thing to have knowledge, but it's something totally different to use that knowledge in those most stressful situations and therefore make a wise decision. So the Vedic culture, in other words, makes it very interesting and easy to devote to all knowledge, all power in the form of our different devatas that represent symbolically different aspects of Ishwara. How else can we relate to Ishwara? When you need a doctor, who do you go to? You go to a doctor. If you want to learn how to sing, who do you go to? You go to a singer. If you want to learn how to do creative writing, you go to a novelist or a journalist or a communicator, someone that specializes in that particular field. So what does this mean? Everyone is a specialist, taking that speciality from what? All knowledge, all power. If someone's a biologist in one particular area, suppose they're a gene researcher. In other words, they take all knowledge, all power, and out of that infinite available options, what do they say? I think I'm going to have some gene research knowledge. And so they spend their whole life learning and mastering just one topic. And then if someone else needs some gene research knowledge, who do you go to? You go to a gene research specialist. In other words, you're only ever going to all knowledge, all power through the means of someone who has taken that all knowledge, all power in the aspect of that area which interests them. So this means you're only ever devoting to all knowledge, all power in different aspects by going to different people who have taken that particular speciality and spend their lives in to master. So this is what we call devotion. And this devotion is called, in chapter 10, if you remember, Saguna Bhakti. Saguna Bhakti means anything that has to do with creation. That means with the 3 gunas. That means Sattva Guna, knowledge, Tamaguna, the actual material, and also Rajaguna, the power which put that material into that particular form which you're devoting to. And what is that form made out of? It's made out of the material. And how is it put together? By the knowledge. Therefore, these three powers, sattva guna, knowledge, rajaguna, a power, and tamaguna, the material, these three are that which makes this entire universe of forms. So in other words, whatever you see around you are just these three gunas. These three gunas in the form of material being put together by this rajaguna, the power, into the form that it is through the knowledge. So this means we are still only ever devoting to Ishwara by the specialist that we go to. You are only ever devoting to Ishwara. You're not devoting to Brahman, because you cannot objectify Brahman. You are Brahman. So this means all prayers are only ever going to Ishwara. All knowledge is ever only taking place in Ishwara's order. All understanding is because of Ishwara. Moksha is because of Ishwara. So the irony is, Brahman is the final reality, which I'm trying to understand. But Brahman has no power to educate me about Brahman. Because you are Brahman. What is Brahman? Kshetranya, the knower that knows about this mind being ignorant or knows about this mind being knowledgeable. So this means I'm looking for the final reality. Final reality has no power to give me anything. What is it that I'm actually going to? I'm going to Ishwara, because this is Ishwara's world. Brahman has nothing to do with this. Brahman is just awareness of this world as it is, shining upon the entire world through every person's mind. And that person, through which Brahman is shining, is then looking for the truth. Everything is taking place in Ishwara's orders. So how can you not find yourself devotional, prayerful, having a sense of gratitude towards that one intelligence which we are entirely dependent upon to understand anything? Everything here is about Ishwara. Nothing's got to do with Brahman, even though Brahman is the final reality. But what's the means to Brahman? Ishwara.
If Ishwara is controlling everything, even the devotion is a thought that arises, right? So that thought also must be controlled by Ishwara himself.
Yeah, it's supplied by the order of Ishwara. I wouldn't say control, because it's not entirely control. You still have your own power to modify your thoughts. But the material is supplied by Ishwara. What that thought is made out of is supplied by Ishwara. Because, for example, suppose I say now to you, okay, what thought are you referring to? Give me one thought. And then you say, okay, thought of...
thought of an apple.
Are you referring to the color, to the stem, to the seed, to a little section of the apple? What exactly are you referring to when you say apple? No matter what you say, it is nothing but a put together of forms making this picture of an apple. So we only call it an apple for the sake of relating with an apple. But is it really an apple? Well, it's just color, it's a stem, it's seeds, maybe some juiciness there. And then we say that is an apple. But did you create the seeds? Did you create the color? Did you create the juiciness? Did you create the stem? No, it is all supplied by Ishwara's order. And then we use that and we talk about apple. So even a thought is nothing but objects put together, held inside the memory. Memory is also kept by the order of Ishwara. It's designed by Ishwara.
If two people, let's say one person is not a devotee of Ishwara, another person is a devotee of Ishwara, who is controlling that thought? It's Ishwara himself, right? Because Ishwara is controlling all the thoughts.
No, many orders are controlling the thought, Pavan. So it's not just Ishwara. See, the thought of environment, for example, starts to rain. Who's now controlling my thoughts? Is it the rain? Well, it is a little bit of rain, because if the rain is torrential and it's loud, then it's going to affect my thoughts.
Yes, but the rain itself is controlled by Ishwara, right? Because
exactly. So in other words, everything is Ishwara. So in other words, that's why I say over and over again, this is Ishwara's order. And therefore, you got no choice but to participate in Ishwara's order. That is the only way to succeed in life. In other words, the proportion to which one is in alignment with Ishwara's order is a proportion to how smoothly one's life is. That's all we can do. And this is why Dharma is going to be taught, so that we can actually live in that alignment.
The very choice to follow Ishwara itself is created.
Yeah, so exactly. So in other words, you've got a choice, right, to follow Ishwara's order or not. That is also supplied by Ishwara. So Ishwara is the one that gives.
The act of making a choice also has to be under his control, right?
Yeah, the act of making a choice also is determined on many causes, because that person can only make a choice on the basis of what they know, right? The amount of knowledge they've stored in their life and about the experiences they went through, that's also going to determine the kind of choices they make. So no matter what you ask about, it's just nothing but a collection of the experiences, which are also objects in this world, created by this Ishwara, all intelligence, all power. And then we use this knowledge to ask a question. We use this knowledge to make a choice, only on the basis of that little bit of knowledge that you and I know. So this means our choice is still limited by the amount of knowledge that we have. So now you ask, what is the question of free will? There is free will, but it is limited by the amount of choice, the amount of education that you have.
Free will is also part of Ishvara only, right?
Yeah, that's Ishwara's order, exactly. So in other words, free will is an order that allows a discerning intellect to make choice A from B. In other words, it allows, to assess the possibilities and therefore make the right choice.
What about the values that you feel like you're born with? Sometimes people don't come across wanting to pray, or they're not born with that notion and don't stumble across it, sort of thing.
You come with some samskaras, but also come with your own conditionalities. So if you don't want to pray, that's fine. But then you're still praying indirectly. How? By getting involved with those things in this world. Because I just said everything is Ishwara. Even your girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse is just Ishwara in the form of what they are. So you are never not devoting or praying or asking for Ishwara's order to be in alignment with with what you think would make you happy. To ask is to pray. To pray is to ask. That's all prayer is.
I guess I was just meaning in general about values that you're born with, if it's even worth trying to change them sometimes.
I thought you explained that with the prabhata karma. Your accumulated karma from whatever life you had before determines what parents you're born with or what situation you're born with. You've still got free will, but it's within those boundaries of knowledge that's through the conditioning of your parents and what they teach you. If you don't go to church, for example, or your parents never take you to church, then there's a good chance you won't be praying, unless you have some kind of suffering and then you decide to make a massive life change or something.
Exactly. So that all your conditionality, your childhood, your parents, all your culture, your grown up, your environment, your friends, all of that determines the totality behaviors that you will express throughout your adulthood.
Like your knowledge, like you said, your boundaries of knowledge, and then the choices are limited due to that.
Exactly. In other words, good. So in other words, the more your knowledge expands, the more you're capable of exercising free will in the light of that new knowledge that you have acquired.
You can change it. You just got to take an interest to change it.
We all know how much change takes time, and then what are we trying to do? We're trying to change those around us once in a while. And yet we are with ourselves 24/7, and we still find it so hard to change. It takes years to make one slight satisfactory difference. And yet we're expecting those who we just say maybe every 24 hours do this to change. Let's look at the reality here, right? In other words, you can still influence, but there is a level of understanding that it's so hard to change.
So when I hear this, that everything is within the purview of Ishwara's Srishti, and to an extent I have started acknowledging that as well, then my question to myself is, who is seeking, why is seeking? And whatever we are going to seek would be within this Ishwara Srishti, and we are actually the absolute reality, which cannot be reached by this Ishwara Srishti. Then what I'm doing, what should be my goal? Because I'm already absolute reality.
You're already the truth. You're already the reality right now. But what is preventing me from recognizing that? This mind. So what am I then doing? I'm using this world, which is Ishwara, to help me to purify this very mind. So in other words, it's not like you have to acquire moksha. You already are limitless and free right now. So this means it's not a matter of acquiring some skill or something in the future. We're just discovering that I am already that right now. And that takes a lot of work on what? This very mind, which is abstracting that knowledge with its own notions, with its own conditionalities, with its own grown-up, with its own grown-up culture and childhood, and all of the notions that have been, put through lifetimes through the form of samskaras. So we are now using this knowledge to simply remove those notions. And therefore, what remains is that final acceptance, owning up to, I am that. So this means you don't have to do anything about the fact that you are Brahman, because you are Brahman right now. You just have to remove those obstacles which are preventing me from totally owning up to that without a single doubt. And that owning up involves work. And what is work? Nothing but, well, work, right? On yourself. In other words, you're depending on the world. So this is why we say the world is a blessing. That's the only, which means the only reason we're born here is to use this world as a means to an end. So who becomes your savior? Ishwara. This is why all religions talk about God, because it is all God here. It is only God. You don't have to worry about what you are. It is only surrendering to this will of God, surrendering to God's will, which is your own purity. So when we say surrender to the will of God, what are we talking about? Surrender to your own will. And what is your will? To be happy, to be free, because we're all inherently seeking freedom. The moment there is a limit, we want to get rid of that limit. And so how do we get rid of that limit? Not by acquiring limitlessness, but by understanding I am that already now. Yeah, so this means you do need Ishwara. You do need prayers, surrender, devotion, because all of this is saying to yourself, this goal is so important to me that I'm willing to go through the process of curing this mind. It's kind of like the salmon, right? They go from the river to the ocean, and then the salmon want to return back into the river, and the current's flowing against them. It's very hard to go back into the river, but the salmon, through their hard effort, against all odds, they swim against the current and eventually go back to the source from whence they came. In that same way, the mumukshu, in other words, the desirer of liberation, or the jijnatsu, in other words, the one who desires to know this knowledge, to know themselves, in that same way is swimming against all currents of life, including, as Lorena has said, conditionalities from childhood. All of the self-esteem issues come up, right? With your relatives, all of that comes up, and yet still you're finding that inner strength to swim against that tide and still go back to that source from whence you came. And that involves work, that involves patience, that involves faith and trust in yourself. It almost involves a lot of stubbornness to not give up. And what is faith, stubbornness? What is all of that? That's Ishwara's order. In other words, I'm borrowing one order after the other to swim against this tide so that I can arrive back to, quote, arrive back to whence I came.
So would you say desire would be to go easily downstream and just continue doing, a dharmic pleasure, like, it's almost like when you use that salmon analogy, it would be easier just to turn around and go back, and like that would be desire in a way. You could just go with the flow and just
yeah, sure. See, if you go with the flow, you're probably you're probably going with your likes and dislikes.
So it means I have to work not to gain that knowledge or not to gain something, but I have to work as a seeker to undo the ignorance or the loss of knowledge that I already have, right?
Yeah, so
I'm working towards undoing that ignorance.
Good. So we're only undoing the false notions. We're not adding anything. It's not like cooking rice. To cook rice, you need instructions. Cook rice for 5 minutes, and if you do so, you will get your dish within 10 minutes time. So you can't ask when I'm going to get moksha, right? Because understanding takes different time depending on what kind of mind you're dealing with. Some of us who are sharp, we get it in 1 month. For some of us, we get it in 1 year. Or some of us get it in 5 years. Some of us get it in 1 lifetime. But we still get it nevertheless. Why? Because we are still like those salmon working hard against all odds, because our focus is on that one goal.
So one more question popped up just now. So when we say that we just need to have the knowledge of our true self, right? Then there's one knowledge which is called information that that you're teaching us, you're telling us that we are the absolute reality. This is an information, right? Which I accept, correct? And there's another thing called experience. Like I know I have the experience that yes, I am that absolute reality. What is required? Informational knowledge or the experience?
Knowledge does not contradict experience. For example, do you have knowledge how to drive a car? Absolutely. That knowledge of driving a car is simultaneously of having that experience. So it's actually not a big deal. I mean, if I ask you right now, you know how to drive a car? You're like, yes. Are you in some kind of a state because you know how to drive a car? No, you are absolutely normal how you always are. So even if you're not driving a car, do you still know how to drive a car? Absolutely. Because once you have mastered the topic of driving a car, you always know how to drive a car, whether you're talking about it or not. In other words, you are as though always experiencing, even though that's probably an incorrect analogy to use, as though experiencing of knowing how to drive a car. So I wouldn't really call it an experience. I would just call it an understanding which takes place. Once it does so, there's no need to, quote, experience anything, because you're never not experiencing yourself. There's only self here, only one reality, Brahman, and that you are. So how can you experience something new? Because that implies that it's in time. But Brahman is out of time. So this means moksha is not about experiencing anything. It's simply owning up that what I'm experiencing right now in the stage as a seeker is exactly the same experience in a stage of a jnani hood or a Jivan Muktaha. And this is what we talk about. This is what we mean by owning up. There is nothing that I need to do other than to remove the notions which are saying that I'm supposed to experience something, which are saying that I'm supposed to be in some different reality. So that very notion is preventing me from accepting myself right now as I am. In other words, as long as that notion is there, I will never attain the final reality because I will always negate it, thinking it should be something else. So what is Vedanta saying? You are already that now. Remove those notions which are denying you from accepting that you are that right now. It's not an experience, it is knowledge. But knowledge does not contradict experience. So what do I mean exactly when I say knowledge does not contradict experience? When you know it, is it not true that you have a sense of confidence in yourself about knowing something? If I ask you, do you know how to drive a car? Absolutely. There's a confidence that comes with that. So knowing this reality, there's a confidence simultaneously that underlines all of your transactions in this world. This is, as I said, Ganapati, his stomach is full, Ganesha. In other words, he's able to take on challenges in this world with cheerfulness, because underlining all of the appearances of these challenges, there's that knowledge that I am complete and limitless, eternal, and nothing can harm me, nothing can touch me. From that joy, from that place, you're able to intelligently, cheerfully attend to worldly challenges without having the need to negate them, because you still have your own swadharma, your own duty in this world, your own skills and talents to shine in this world. So why would I deny the world, Ishwara, the one who has given me this knowledge? Why would I deny that reality, my skills? In other words, now the person having understood the knowledge, they cannot help but to give back, because they understand the immensity of what it takes to go through the process of undoing these notions. All of the, the gurus and the shastra, how many teachers did you have to come across to come to the final knowledge? All of those teachers were nothing but Ishwara. All those shastras and those knowledges were nothing but Ishwara in those particular forms that they are. So this means we take on an attitude of gratitude now, because we understand that how many people that we go through to ultimately discern, go through this huge marketplace of options and finally come to that pinpoint. What does it really mean to say moksha? Instead of going, is it really that? Let me go elsewhere, right? That takes a long time to come to that peaceful place. Now, how does a Jivan Muktaha relate to Ishwara? This idol that I am devoting to, called Ishtadeva. So it's nice to have an Ishtadeva, something you can relate to. This idol is just one representation of Ishwara. And it's meaningful for me because it reminds me of this all knowledge, all power. So this means a Jivan Muktaha doesn't stop devoting. They don't go, so I'm everything, so I'm not going to just, devote to anything anymore, because I'm full. It's not like that at all. In other words, even the Jivan Mukta becomes even more devotional out of what? Their own gratitude for having gone through the immensity of challenges in order to come to that place that they are. There's two possible attitudes that a Jivan Mukta or a Jnani or Ajnani can have towards an Ishtadeva. What am I now asking? When you devote to your personal deity, there's two kinds of attitudes that you can have. The first is you can use that devata to help you attain or to have more of those benefits which that devata is associated to. So if you need more knowledge and you want to hold that knowledge in life, right, because knowledge matters to you, then you devote, you pray to Saraswati for the sake of having that benefit of knowledge. That's the first attitude you can have. Nothing wrong with that, because we all want success in life. And I just explained, you need success in life, you need knowledge, you need willpower, you need the subtle intellect to navigate through this world. So there's nothing wrong asking. In fact, those who don't ask are the ones who probably, take extra long to, to move somewhere until someone says finally, hey, you have a right to ask. That's why you were born. You need help. You can't do it by yourself. That's attitude number one. Attitude number two is, if you don't want anything, that's also fine. But now that devata is not a means of the benefit, but rather is a beautiful reminder, a meaningful reminder of all knowledge, all power. If you relate to Ganapati, then pray to Ganapati, because it reminds you of this vast intelligence that is operating in and through every minute millisecond of every place that you look. Therefore, it serves as a reminder of this intelligence. So there's two attitudes that you can have. And you never know what someone is devoting, what attitude they're using. So it's not about now assessing, they're not a jnani because they're devoting to this. They're probably looking for some benefits there, and a jnani is so full, they don't need anything. So in other words, you're not, trying to do that. I'm just showing you that there's different intentions that you can have towards your deity. So this means now intention becomes your goal. That means, what is my intention behind what I am doing? That is all that matters. So in other words, the intention is much more important than which deity should I devote to. Whichever one that you relate to. Whatever is meaningful for you. If you want greater sense of willpower, then go and devote to Durga. If you don't like the way Durga looks like, then go and find another deity. But as long as your intention is one of these two attitudes, it's completely acceptable. Now, what is the attitude towards the world for a Jivan Mukta? Firstly, it is not one of rejection. It is not one of denial, because think about it like this. Is it not true that you are here today because of the opportunities that have been presented to you at some point in the past? And those opportunities came from the world. So if I start rejecting the world, what are you actually doing? You're saying no to ongoing opportunities. In other words, you're saying, I don't want a new opportunity. Therefore, you're simultaneously saying no to your swadharma, because your swadharma can only be expressed by someone offering you an opportunity to which you can either then say through your intellect, yes or no. Therefore, why would a Jivan Mukta say no when a Jivan Mukta still has his or her own swadharma to give to this world? Therefore, they're still an active participant, but very focused. And that focus comes from knowing what is it that I need, what is it that I don't need. In other words, they're not searching now. So in other words, their focus is a lot better. In other words, as long as you're alive, your prarabdha karma is still running. And that prarabdha karma needs a job. If it doesn't have a job, what happens? Then you're bored. And who wants to be bored? Nobody. So in other words, we still need to be busy, active in our particular swadharma. As a result of this understanding, what is the Jivan Mukta's attitude towards the world? It is one of divinity. It is not of, oh, I'm just praying to atoms, I'm dealing, with a bunch of molecules, I'm dealing with a bunch of mithya. It is not that the Jivan Mukta says this world is an illusion. Remember that chart that I showed you last week called mithya within mithya? You cannot call any one of those things an illusion. It just means dependent reality. So when you look at this world, it is not an illusion, it is just mithya. What does mithya mean? It means it is a dependent reality. On what? On its predecessor, on its successor. And ultimately, all mithya, as you saw in that chart, resolve into the upadhi, which is Ishwara. And what does upadhi resolve into? Brahman. Therefore, to call this world an illusion, you're actually calling yourself an illusion, because everything resolves into you. You're the final reality here. We've shown that already. Kshetranya, the knower. I just said you're the final reality. You're asking, how is that so? What did we discuss last week? What is the nature of Kshetranya, the knower? You're always knowing about everything. Therefore, you cannot be away from the final reality. So, world is not an illusion, but it becomes a place of reverentiality. In fact, the whole Vedic culture is about having reverentiality in life, of gratitude. So how do you apply gratitude? You start small. Like, what is it that I'm grateful for? And then you expand your circle. You can maybe go outside your family. You can go further out. You can go into the world. You can go into many things that you're grateful for. If everything is divinity, Ishwara, then how do you account for adharmic behavior in this world, right? Things that are unrighteous, immorality. The answer is very simple. How do we start when we get born as a baby? So a baby is born, and it comes with what? It comes with a natural inbuilt program called dharma. And this dharma means I don't want to hurt myself, but I also understand simultaneously that others don't want to be hurt. So we all come inbuilt with a dharma program. And we also come inbuilt with empathy. If you spend some time, in kindergarten or something, then, you see this innocence, this wanting to help each other. Right? They're not like asking, let me help you. They're just like innocently helping each other. So there's empathy in and through the child, but there's also that sense of dharma, that I don't want to hurt you. Of course, the bullying starts much later, and now you're going to say why, because that's already adharma, when the conditions get, distorted, when that natural program gets distorted. So the baby gets born pure. What is it that you like about the baby, by the way, when you hold that, when you see a child? Why do you like that innocence, that purity? What is that purity that you like? What specifically is it that you like when you see a child? It is called dharma, that purity of God. In fact, dharma is God, manifest through a human being. So what you're actually finding very attractive is God's purity, which is your own purity. That's why we like children. That's why we adore children, because they're pure. They're not contaminated by these notions that are making it hard to see that purity. So the child comes with the natural program called dharma. I don't want to hurt you. And I also know that you don't want to be hurt. I want to care for you, but I also know that you want to care for me. That's inbuilt. The child also comes with samskaras from past life. That means they take those habitual, those strong notions from past life, and that also comes in. Of course, this starts to fructify much later in life, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In fact, it even continues 15 to 20. It's a strong age where they start to come out. So this comes in. Now, what happens then? The child, suppose, is in a family. And now the child knows my parents love each other. But now one of them starts to dominate the other, starts to control the other. So what does now the child with a natural program start to associate? Starts to associate love with control. Because the child doesn't have any knowledge to evaluate what's going on here. All they know is these two people love me, and this is called love. And now I see love means to control. So now what does a child learn? It learns to control. So what does this child as an adult do now? They start to control the environment. Now, what does it mean to control the environment? It means to disregard the feelings of those which I'm controlling. And to disregard the feelings, I'm causing pain onto them. But also, I'm causing pain onto myself, because it is not always true that if you try to control others, do they comply? Not always. In most cases, if they're strong enough, they will say no. And that's going to disappoint you. In other words, now you're hurt. That means my own dharma. So I've associated love to control. I start to control those around me as an adult. And that control causes conflict. And that's called adharma. Why? Because as a child, in school, with parents, in the environment, on TV, on the news, I've made associations. Love means control. Or sometimes it goes even further. The child tries to stand up for themselves in school, and then the bully hits them or pulls their hair for a girl. We've all been bullied, maybe not, but we all have experienced a level of bulliness in school. So what do we now associate? If I try to stand up for myself or say something, then I'm going to experience pain. So what does this result in life then? This is just one example, right? You can now keep on going, how we link up different associations. So now as an adult, we now don't want to speak out. We try to hold things in our relationship because we know actually we don't know because it's in our unconscious. It happened so long ago, but we try to hold things in. We don't want to rock the boat in a relationship because if we do, we will get hurt. So therefore we then hold it in. But if you hold things in, what happens? The resentment keeps on building. And then how does it come out? In a social situation, when one of the partners is in a vulnerable position, what does the other do? They make a sarcastic remark and they put him down. And then the other doesn't understand. Why are you doing this to me? You know, everything's okay at home, but in a social situation, you're kind of putting me down. Like, what did I do wrong? And the other doesn't even understand why they're doing it because they've been collecting this resentment and not having the ability to speak out because they fear of rocking the boat. Therefore, this condition comes out in the most awkward situations and it causes confusion. In other words, even within a relationship, these adharmic acts start to come out. So I'm showing you how complex the human being really is. It's not just a matter of being given a pure program and go live with it. No, by the moment you're born, you start from then on making these associations. And these associations create the human being that you are now today, but also those around us. And then furthermore, what happens then? This program further distorts how we perceive the world. We perceive the world two ways, either through subjectivity, in other words, because I'm unable to handle their irrational behavior, because it makes me painful inside, what do? Temporarily, I make myself feel good. How? By projecting onto them, by labeling them as an XYZ person, because because it triggers their own pain, right? Because their own mind hasn't been resolved yet. So the way to get rid of that is just to project. And this is what we call labeling. So most of the world chooses option number one. What's option number two? Option number two is the Jiva. If they're smart enough, they can decide to judge objectively. In other words, they can say, this person that is doing this foolish behavior is a result of many causes in life, many variables, just like I am also. And they cannot help them. In fact, they don't even know. To them, it's normal. The control is normal. The unwillingness to speak out, to stand up for oneself is normal. Why is it normal? Because I've just shown you how complex, how we develop these associations in our past, and then we walk through them in the adulthood, thinking they are acceptable. But the problem is with this, it is the very condition that creates pain in our lives. Because suppose that you don't want to speak out and your partner is kind of like, you just hold it in. You think your partner doesn't know? It is felt. If it's not felt in them, it is felt in you. Because as long as you know I am unable to speak out, what does that mean? I am not strong enough to speak out. In other words, it sustains one's guilt. It sustains one's shame and embarrassment in oneself. It sustains their low self-esteem. And as long as that sustains, what does that mean? I'm holding in a dharma, which is not a natural program. And because it's not a natural program, and you know your natural program is freedom from all of this, there's guilt. But because I'm unable to express myself, that guilt just keeps on remaining. So what does this mean? We need to look at this honestly, our inner conditions, and confront them, and then start to actually address them. Otherwise, they just never leave. They just start to dictate our lives, take over our minds, and we just, every time we come onto a Vedantic session or any kind of session about existence, guess what takes over eventually? Yeah, but what about, and then we bring up one of those conditions that we haven't resolved from our past childhood. This is why we say in Vedanta, there's a certain level of qualifications that you need. In other words, before the person is able to assimilate, to free themselves on an absolute level, they need to be free on a relative level. There needs to be a relative sense of freedom before they can pursue the absolute freedom. Because the moment they go into an absolute freedom, what's the mind narrative going to say? No. You've got some things to resolve. And can the mind be successful to constantly multitask between one and the other? No way. Because moksha requires a lot of focused efforts. But that mind cannot be focused because it's still referring to its childhood patterns, feeling guilty, because it's refusing it to accept it or to bring it up. So this means, yes, there are fears, there are things that we're putting under the carpet, but it doesn't work. It is the very obstacle that is holding us from moving forward successfully in life. So therefore, what do? You go and to devote to Ganapati, to Ganesha, because he's the one who helps you with that strong, discerning intellect to make the right decision and to courageously speak out. So now the question is, suppose you're clear, but the other's not. What do you do then? Firstly, all you can do is you can help to influence them. We cannot absolutely, as I explained before, change a person, because change is so hard and we all know it, right? And now, if we know that and then we're expecting to change another person, it just doesn't make sense. So we can only firstly help by providing some alternative views about what they could be doing, some possibilities in the light of what you know. But at the same time, we need to protect our own dharmic program, because this is where it all goes wrong. This is where the big blunder gets made. When one person starts being irrational, what does the other start doing? They also start being irrational. Now you've got two irrational beings who are unable to solve the problem. In other words, two irrational beings are vomiting each other's ignorance onto each other, and nothing's being solved. So the biggest blunder that we make is, so it's not a blunder when one's irrational, and that's normal. I mean, that's pretty much everywhere you see it, you're going to see irrationality one way or the other. But the blunder is when you too become irrational. In other words, this person's cheating the system. They're exploiting the system. Therefore, I will also exploit the system. That's where the blunder gets made. This person's name calling me. Therefore, I will also name call them. Now you've got two irrational beings. So the greatest strength, the mark of wisdom, is to retain one's composure in the presence of irrationality, in the presence of foolishness. That is the greatest form of wisdom. Not allowing one's own natural dharmic program to be overlapped or superimposed by someone else's irrationality. Like Krishna, he wanted to reform Duryodhana so many times. He wanted to influence him so many times. He wasn't successful. Ram, he wanted to influence and reform Ravana. He wasn't successful. If the Lord himself is not successful, then what to say about you and I? If the Lord himself, as a form of an avatar, with so much more intelligence and charm and ability to influence another, with all of those qualities, unable to reform Duryodhana and Ravana, then what to say about you and I, who are just doing truly, sincerely the best that we can, with much less knowledge, with much less centeredness, but it doesn't stop us from still attempting to influence to the best of our abilities. So the person can either listen, maybe apply that advice 5 years later, 10 years later, you don't know. Sometimes they apply 20 years later. In fact, I still remember my parents telling me some advice 30 plus years later, and I'm only now understanding that advice now. So this means it's not all going to waste. It still comes out much later. So it means you have to be very strong and patient, but there is some form of influence. Or they can decide to not listen. So this is totally up to them. This is where your control ends. So your control stops where? Up to the point of sincerely wanting to help them. From there on, you've done your duty. Just like Krishna, he's applied 5 possible solutions to offer the Indraprastha back to Yudhishthira. He said, Duryodhana, give them, Indraprastha back. 5 villages, 5 houses, 1 house with 5 rooms. No, 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 no. In other words, he made it easier and easier to Duryodhana every single time to say yes, but he still didn't get through to him. So Krishna is showing us how to negotiate. Don't give up. Make it easier and easier and easier. If that still doesn't work, that is where your free will ends. And that's when, as Krishna has set up a firm boundary, that's when the person sets up a firm boundary. I've done the best of my abilities. Now let's, apply a different solution. So this means the person needs to know where their boundaries are. If you don't, then you're just going to keep on wasting more and more time, and that's going to take a toll on you. That's going to be your own adharma. Therefore, the person sets boundaries once they've done the best they can. You can only influence another person to the best of your abilities if your own house is in order. Suppose I go to your house, mental house, but suppose I go to your physical house and your house is in a mess and you start telling me about management in life. I'll be nice and I'll be like, okay, yeah, just tell me more. But what am I going to actually pay attention to? More your house. In other words, I'm not going to take you seriously. So in that same way, the person can own the proportion to which you are influential directly depends on how much your mental house is in order. So that needs to be taken care of. And that is a lifelong work. That's a constant work for all of us. And two, one needs to overcome the fear of rocking the boat, because we don't want to sometimes rock the boat, as I explained earlier, in a relationship, because we think, well, things are okay. Things have been going well for 5 years, 10 years. Let me not bring this up. But the more you don't bring it up, the more it keeps on building, the more it's felt by you, but also the other. Eventually, it comes to a boiling point, and the boiling point is something that's going to bring something that is sometimes irreversible. So this means, yes, one needs to rock the boat, and it is going to produce a lot of more discomfort, maybe for 2 years. In fact, there's a story, mother had 3 daughters, and the favorite daughter of the mother was the one that was constantly putting down the mother. And the mother, being a loving mother, she accepted that for many years. But it got to such a point where the mother just didn't know what to do, because, you know, she's like starts to complain and said, I don't know what to do. And she's constantly putting me down. I'm doing the best I can for her. I'm protecting her. I'm giving her whatever she wants. And the advice was for her, you know, she was asked, well, but who's actually experiencing pain, right? Because you're trying to protect her, but you're actually not protecting her, because every time you put up with it, you're allowing her to do it again. Now, do you think the daughter feels good every time she puts you down? She doesn't. In other words, I'm trying to give the best life to the daughter, to the son, it doesn't matter, by not standing up, by not saying something, by not rocking the boat. But every time you're doing that, you're actually giving license for that behavior to be done one more time. Now, do you think that child who you're trying to offer the best, do you think they're feeling good every time they put the parent down? Put you down? Absolutely not. In other words, it's counterintuitive. Sometimes we think that by not rocking the boat, I'm actually preserving a state of harmony, but actually I am sustaining a state of disharmony. So this means, what did the mother then do? She decided to set the boundary. I'm now going to talk with the daughter and say, why are you, acting like this? You were always my favorite daughter. I always respected you. I'm giving you whatever I can. Why are you being like this? And I had a conversation. And then the mother started to firm up her resolve. And that created even more conflict for the next 2 years, because the mother decided to rock the boat after, I think, 10 years of this behavior. And she went through 2 years of extreme discomfort. But guess what happened? Slowly, the daughter learned this boundary cannot be crossed, because the mother's resolve was uncrossable. Therefore, it will cause some discomfort, but it is at least in the name of Dharma. You are preserving that state of truth, purity. So sometimes, we need to actually take that challenge to gently start to bring up those boundaries without causing too much, of course, upheaval in the relationship. What was the original question? How to relate to Ishwara? We've so far seen that every aspect of our life is Ishwara Srishti. Srishti means creation. So the more we bring in Ishwara, the more we are alignment with God's order, God's laws. And therefore, less and less of Jiva Srishti. What is Jiva Srishti? Our own superimposition, likes and dislikes, overlapped over the world, how we want the world to be. So the less Jiva Srishti, the more Ishwara Srishti. In other words, the more what is comes into our life. What does it mean to say what is? Suppose you're emotionally hurt, right? Someone has emotionally hurt you, and you come up to me and you say, I'm hurt. And I just go, you don't worry, we all get hurt. And I just kind of brush you off like that. Am I actually acknowledging what is, or am I crossing out what's in front of me? I'm going to my own narrative. I'm going to my own wisdom. In other words, even if the person is wise, they can still fall for this Jiva Srishti. They just bring in their wisdom, thinking it's going to fix the problem, but you're totally disregarding what is right now in front of me. So what does it mean to say bringing more Ishwara Srishti? It means to accept the situation as it is and work from there instead of working from as I would have it be, just so that I can feel comfortable. So it's not about your own comfort, but it's about looking at what is true right now and using my discerning intellect and then handling that with my discerning intellect. That's called looking at the world as it is and working with what is right now. Why did I just share this? Because we went through this intellectual conversation, several sessions, and I wanted to bring it down to earth, just like Ganapati, 1 foot on the ground always, 1 foot aligned. So I've now finished with this topic and I want to move on to the next topic. How does Kshetrajna, whose nature is Sat and Chit, existence awareness, become the Kshetram? How does Brahman, consciousness, become this world of form, of tangible form, of appearances? First of all, what is Kshetram? Let's get that established. Revision. Does someone remember the term for Kshetram?
Projected through the power of Maya into matter, into shape and form and name and whatever we're looking at.
Matter, whatever we're looking at. In other words, what you said was time, space, all objects in time and space, including laws and orders. In fact, you want to be a little bit more technical. First laws and orders, then space, time, and objects. So this is the definition of Kshetram. Now, let's use the dream analogy to start introducing the answer to my original question. This Kshetrajna has the capacity to manifest itself into infinite appearances. This suggests that this capacity is both knowledge, but also power, because you cannot manifest something unless you have the knowledge of how to manifest it, but you also have the power to do so in the first place. Just like that, the dreamer has the capacity, the power to manifest the dream world. A world that is real, that is time and space of itself, with objects and laws and orders, and a very intelligently well-made world. And this also suggests that the dreamer, in order to do that, has to have the knowledge of that dream world, because the dream world is only as good as the knowledge that you have about those objects. For example, if you've only lived in a forest, then your dream is only going to be about forests. All right, if you lived in a forest and different countries, different cultures, then your dream is going to have so much more availability within itself. Why? Because your mind is got that extra knowledge. Now think about Ishwara's like all knowledge. That kind of dream we call this universe. The mind, which is what creates this world of forms, because where do these world of forms come from? They come from the mind. Now remember that chart we talked about the Mahat, which was the Sattva Guna, all knowledge. So in that same way, this mind is all knowledge in reference to a personal dream that you have. And the dreamer also at the same time has capacity to project the knowledge stored in that mind and create a world out of it. So think about this. The dreamer has a power to project, but the dreamer also has the knowledge itself, which through his power gets projected and creates this entire world of time, space, and forms. Every night, these two powers are active. Your very power in you, there is, which is capable of projecting this mind of knowledge. And when it does so, it creates a world, a material made out of what? You. What is the dream made out of? None other than the dreamer. Where does the knowledge of the dream come from? None other than the dreamer. Where does the power to project that material and the universe of forms and names, where does that come from? None other than the dreamer. Power to project, the knowledge itself, and the material all comes from the one cause of that entire dream. Now, when this dream comes, manifests itself, then in reference to its manifestation, you, the dreamer, I'm not going to say what the word you means yet, you, the dreamer, become its creator. And that creator's name is Ishwara. So every night you become Ishwara in reference to your dream. Again, what material is used to create the dream? That very creator that we call Ishwara, which is none other than yourself. So wherever you look around the dream, whoever you talk to, whatever you read, whatever you chant, all of that is material. All of that is form. All of that is name. Coming out of whom? The one mind which your power has projected. The knowledge which your power has projected. In your presence, this world is. Do you need the dream to exist? Absolutely not. Without the dream, you continue to exist. If you didn't exist, then out of what is the dream going to come from? What is the universe of names and forms and time and space going to come from? Where is the knowledge going to come from? Where is the material going to come from? Where is time going to come from? Where is the principle of space going to come from? Where is the actual projection going to come from? It's got to come from somewhere. Therefore, you become the cause of the dream world. You exist without the dream. Because of your existence, the dream manifests itself. So this implies that there is a cause, and that cause is both the material, the intelligence, but also the projection power of that material and that intelligence. And that cause thus has to precede the effect. What is the effect? The actual dream universe. Therefore, again, it goes back to this cause-effect relationship. What we perceive is an effect. That effect resolves into that one cause, which in this analogy is the dreamer, in whom there are these powers to create this world, which we then talk about, and we find, ourselves communicating and talking with and discussing and taking pictures of and charging money to take pictures of ourselves, because you're only charging money for what? Form. All of that material is your own material. Quite funny how this world works, isn't it? In reference to the dream, you, the Kshetrajna, become the creator of the dream, and that's called Ishwara. So there is only one being called Kshetrajna, but in reference to the manifest, that very Kshetrajna now gains the new name called Ishwara. From the standpoint of the dream, I'm still using, this is all the microcosm example. That means this is our own world. From the standpoint of all knowledge, all power, in reference to the dream, is all knowledge, all power intrinsic or incidental attribute of Kshetrajna, of the dreamer? Incidental means consequential. Intrinsic means inherent. It is incidental. Why? Because when the dream is created, the dreamer, that is the Kshetrajna, preserves his nature. When the dream goes away, Kshetrajna still preserves his nature. In other words, even though the dream comes from the Kshetrajna, it still doesn't define the Kshetrajna, because the Kshetrajna, the dreamer, is always free of whatever happens in the world that in its presence he has projected. Therefore, the dream is incidental. It is consequential. It is an effect because of a cause. In the presence of the Kshetrajna, the dream comes. I know you're going to say now, how does it come and what is it, the cause is it to come? I'm going to get to that. So you're the dream creator only in reference to the dream, while your intrinsic nature is what?
All knowledge of God.
Your intrinsic nature is the knower, the Kshetrajna of the dream world, because all knowledge, all power is your own projection. But who's pervading this projection? Who's pervading this knowledge? Who's pervading this material? Sure. I, as existence awareness. Therefore, what is my inherent nature? Existence awareness. Now, let's bring this to a macrocosm. I've now used the microcosm to help us introduce a possibility. So, let's ask, what is a definition of Kshetrajna? Sat Chit Ananda. So now I want to talk about the last word. I talked about already Sat Chit some sessions ago. Now, what about this word Ananda? Now, this Ananda is not what I talked about, Anandamaya Kosha, that kind of bliss. This Ananda means limitlessness. What does limitlessness mean?
No boundaries, timeless, beginningless.
Free of limitations.
No fear.
So in other words, nothing that can limit it. I mean, if there's fear, then it's going to limit limitlessness. It can no longer be limitless. It's now fearful. Okay.
No qualities.
No qualities, good, because if there's one quality, then you're now, defining that limitlessness, that infinity as something. But now you say, well, what about that? Right? So the moment you bring in a quality, you've now limited limitlessness.
Nothing can be outside that limitlessness. There is no object or entity that can be outside that entity.
Excellent, Pavan. So there's nothing that can be outside. Okay, let me focus on Pavan. What question was, what is limitlessness? That means there is not two. The moment you're bringing another, you're now denying limitlessness the second. The moment you bring a second reality, what are you now saying? that limitlessness is everything but that reality, that second reality. So limitlessness means it is not two. The moment you add a second, you've now limited reality 1 and reality 2, because reality 1 is not now reality 2 and reality 2 is not reality 1. Therefore, limitlessness is that which is boundless. It has no boundaries. It is one with itself. Nothing is outside it. It cannot be limited by another existence. It is all inclusive. Nothing's excluded from this reality.
So this limitlessness also means it is unknowable.
Exactly, because if you know it, you're knowing an object, and an object is just one possibility in limitlessness. Excellent observation. So nothing can limit it. What about the possibility of apparent duality? Suppose you take that possibility out of limitlessness. Is it still limitless? No. So what does limitlessness mean? Nothing can limit it. That means there is no possibility which is not possible. Now, if I take out the possibility of apparent duality, this multiplicity of forms, suppose I take that possibility out of limitlessness. Is limitless still limitless? No, because I've denied it the capacity to manifest itself as infinite amount of names and forms. Now, from the standpoint of the universe, this limitlessness, this ananda, what name do we give it? Ishwara. Because what is limitlessness? All knowledge, all power. In fact, there's no contradiction, because what does the word all mean? That means it's everything. So all knowledge, all power is ananda, limitlessness, expressing in the form of limitless amount of objects from the standpoint of this manifest universe. If I didn't have this manifest universe, that means what? It cannot be limitless, because it's being denied the option of apparent duality. There is only one reality, called kshetrajna. In reference to its capacity to manifest the universe, it's called Ishwara. Before this capacity manifests, that means it's still in potential, this capacity is called Maya. Now, I want to bring up Robert's question. If Maya is in existence, does that not mean that Maya becomes an attribute of Brahman? Because we've been speaking throughout this entire time. Limitlessness cannot have attributes. Existence cannot have attributes, because if it does have one single attribute, it is limited. So how do we resolve this contradiction? What is Maya? Non-separate from Brahman, resting in Brahman. Maya is a power in Brahman. There's no such thing as Maya. We only create the word Maya from the standpoint of this manifest universe to help explain how the one can manifest into the many. It's not an attribute. It's a byproduct of limitlessness. So you're saying, what do you mean by that? Well, take, for example, presence of fire. In the presence of fire, there is power to what? Power to burn, power to heat. Now, can you say that burning and heat is an attribute of fire? Can you do that? Is burning and heat separate from the fire? No. In the presence of the fire, the consequential effect of that is burning, is heat. Now, you can't say that heat and burning is some attribute in fire. They're not separate. They're not apart. There's no such thing as heat or burning. There is just fire. In the presence of it, it's incidental is to create the effect of burning and heat. Now, how do we explain this incidental consequence? We create a name called Maya. In that same way, in the presence of Brahman, what is Brahman? Limitlessness. What is the incidental consequence of limitlessness? The power to project. The power to project infinite selves, which are all me. So there's no question of saying this world is Maya, this world is, different reality. It is only Brahman. Just like there's only fire. In the presence of Brahman, of this one reality, which is limitless in nature, there is this universe of names and forms. which you're now experiencing. Where there is existence, there is awareness. Where there is existence, which is aware of itself, there is also limitlessness. Limitlessness is not conditioned by any limits. Therefore, nothing is stopping it from being limitless. Incidental consequence of that limitlessness is the world of multiplicity. The world of multiplicity is not apart from its origin.
When you use the fire analogy and you say that heat and burning are a consequence of the fire, but they still exist. You said that Maya doesn't exist, and that is a consequence of Brahman.
Maya does exist in the standpoint of explaining this world of multiplicity. When we say Maya, what are we talking about? Limitlessness. So to say Maya doesn't exist, you're actually saying that limitlessness doesn't exist, because I just said the consequence of limitlessness is this world. To explain this world, we give it the name Maya.
So can we say that Maya is an effect of Brahman? Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
The burning and the heat are an effect of fire, and we name them burning and heat as we name Maya as an effect of Brahman.
Exactly.
You were saying about the elements. I mean, all the molecules and different things create different things, and you like fire relies on oxygen, you know, like another element. All the elements rely on each other. Just referring back to the last class when you were saying that the Mithya and the Satya and Mithya relationship, everything relies on everything, a cause and effect, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Interdependent.
Yeah. So now suppose that the fire, the burning of the fire melts something, and then the melting produces someone in emotion because now they've lost some object. So the emotion of losing something out because it's melted, the melting itself, the light of the fire, the heat of the fire, all of that is traced back to the ultimate cause, which is just the fire. Right? In that same way, whatever you talk about in this world is traced back to the final, ultimate, highest cause, which is Brahman or Kshetrajna. In the Upanishads, it's somewhere it states that all of those infinite universes, right, are just like a little dot, a speck in limitlessness, in you. So this is the irony. This entire universe, infinite universes, are right now inside you, Brahman. But your own power is capable of making it as though seem like you are inside the universe. And therefore, when you fall for that, then you start looking for objects. The one because of whom this universe exists is looking for satisfaction, right? When everything relies on you, this all entire universes are just inside you. So this is the beautiful power of Maya, which even the rishis cannot explain, because there are some mysteries that we just cannot explain.
Maya is just a result of limitlessness, I guess. That's a direct result of limitlessness.
Which cannot be understood. Because if you try to understand limitlessness, what are you doing? I'm higher than limitless, but you can't do that. Because it's just
got
like,
limited capacity.
Yeah, a limited capacity. Cannot understand your own limitlessness, especially from one standpoint.
Yeah, my final comment is like Brahman should be equated to multiverse. That will clear a lot of problems rather than calling as universe.
Careful, distinction, Ishwara and Brahman, two distinct principles when we talk about this. Yeah, but yes, it's true. In the presence of Ishwara, all knowledge, all power, there is Jagat. And this Jagat does not exclude the possibility of infinite universes. From the standpoint of the germ in your stomach, that's on the lining of your stomach, and is going, wow, look at this big universe. Let me understand this big being. What is one germ, one good bacteria in your stomach lining going to understand? Not much. But from its standpoint, it is a vast universe worthy of exploring. And like, look at yourself. You're just enjoying yourself, thinking, you know, this being, and all of these good bacteria are in your lining of stomach, trying to figure it all out. So all of the bacteria can do is understand that there's essentially no difference between the bacteria and this total being. And that's where the unity, the aikyam between Jiva and Ishwara is established. And that's called moksha. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May all be happy, may all be free from illness, may all behold good things, and may no one suffer.